My boyfriend and I have been together for 2 years. He's a good heart and is normally rational, but his one issue is that he expects to accompany me in every occasion no matter how big or small. He even went with me to my ex-boyfriend's funeral after days of begging. Now my best friend got married few days ago. It was very small and only close family and friends were invited. My boyfriend couldn't come because of the +1 rule. He pitched a hissy fit saying my best friend has no respect for my relationship and was shocked when he learned that I was still going to attend. He told me that if he can't go then I'm expected to not go as well, but that is my best friend and I had to respect her rules. He gave me an ultimatum: either we go together or I stay home with him. I ended up going cause again I respected my friend's rules. He was angry with me and kept calling the entire 2-hour drive, then stopped. Later I got a text from his friend telling me my boyfriend, got into an accident and was taken to the hospital. I freaked out. He gave me the address and I had to leave the wedding and told my friends why. I was crying the entire drive home and kept calling his friend but got no response. I arrived to the hospital and asked about my boyfriend and they checked and told me he wasn't there. My anxiety reached 160% as I kept calling his friends one by one. I just went home and there he was, along with his friend. He saw me and said that he was sorry, but this was the only he can get me home after I left him alone. After the initial shock, I just blew up yelling at him about lying and making me leave my friend's wedding, and having me literally go to the hospital and freaking out cause of him. I kicked his friend out and we got into an argument. He kept talking about how much I love him, thus I left, which is my own doing, not his, and he was just trying to see if I really chose my friend's wedding over him. He then argued that my friend caused this and I shouldn't agree with her to exclude him. I said what he did was horrible and called him horrible and then went to my room. It was awful cause my friends kept calling to check in on him cause they thought he was really at the hospital. He said I overreacted and that I yelled at the wrong person. He has a history of mental health issues but got better the past few months. He also had a recent death in his family which really affected his health generally. My wife, Irene, is very fit. She likes working out and has a proper exercise regime, etc. She believes that if she feels good, she looks good, and she feels good working out, so who am I to stop her? My brother, Will, spent the latter half of last year going through a messy divorce and now needs a place to stay. Though my brother and I aren't very close, I figured he would only stay with us for a couple weeks until he got back on his feet. Will is a typical gym rat. He's always on a very strict diet, always working out and bragging about his gains. I've worked out with him a few times and he's a little obnoxious. He's always mad at you if you don't work at his pace and is always trying to correct your form. He's a pretty fit and muscular guy, but I don't like to exercise with him. Will has been pushing Irene to work out with him because, according to him, she won't be able to keep up with him. Irene mostly just shrugs him off with a laugh and tells him she would love to work out with him. Irene works out in the mornings, 3 times a week, and then does a run in the evening. But she's been busy this past week and hasn't been able to stick to her usual schedule. Will thinks that she's making excuses because she doesn't want to be embarrassed by him. Again, Irene just laughs him off. About 2 days ago, Irene and Will went on an early morning run. I didn't go with them, but the first thing I heard when Will entered the house was, "The only reason I couldn't keep up with you, Irene, is because you were sweating too much." I found this extremely comical, and kinda just laughed him off. Irene rolled her eyes and went to take a shower, so I thought that the conversation would die. However, Will just kept bringing up my wife's sweat. My wife went to work and he told her to make sure she doesn't sweat through her clothes, or when she called me in the middle of day. He yelled, "Tell the sweaty." I said hi. Of course, the comment aggravated me and I told him to knock it off and stop acting like a child. I thought that was the end of it, but he just kept going. By the end of the day, I was tired of his comments, but Irene seemed rather unfazed by them. When she served him food, he made a comment about her sweating into the food. At this point, I was at my wit's end and I told him to stop acting like a slow, referring to his running pace, loser, and eat his food. Will, of course, got angry, and said the only reason he was going slower than usual was because he was distracted by my wife's unhygienic sweat. Irene looked a bit offended by this, and I told Will that I would kick him out if he made another comment like that. He's been super pissed ever since. I jokingly told this story to a mutual friend and they agreed with Will. Maybe I shouldn't be so harsh. I didn't expect this amount of responses. I've decided to kick him out. He will be staying at a nearby hotel now. My daughter turns 11 in 6 weeks. She has been begging for a Nintendo Switch. Due to poor grades and overall bad attitude, we decided not to get a Switch. Money isn't the issue, it's her behavior. She acts very entitled and she's lying left and right. I just don't feel now is the right time for a Switch. The theft, on Easter, we, my husband, our kids, and myself, are at my husband's aunt and uncle's house. Aunt and uncle have 2 adult children, one of whom is mentally delayed, we'll call her cousin. She functions about a 10-years-old level but is in her 40s. She lives in an assisted living apartment and has a job where she gets paid $5 a week. So she doesn't get many upscale things unless they are a gift. Well, cousin had an old Game Boy that she saved up to buy and was playing while we were there. She eventually set it down and moved on to playing a board game with us while the kids ran around playing. My kid decided to be an epic turd and took the Game Boy. She snuck it out of aunt and uncle's by asking if she could go to our car to look for a book she had brought, and stashed it in the glove box. She proceeded to hide the fact that she had the Game Boy for several days, even after being asked where she last saw it. Her opening to come clean when aunt and uncle called and asked if we had seen where cousin might have left it. Due to cousin's challenges, she was utterly distraught over her missing Game Boy. It's one of the few forms of entertainment she has, and she worked hard to have it. I'm disappointed about the thievery, but I'm even more upset over my kid's attitude about being caught. I only found out about it because her sisters ratted her out. Even then, she absolutely refused to tell me the truth and tried to pin it on her sisters. It wasn't until I sat there and thought about it that I knew she was lying to me. Once I told her I knew it had to be her because of XYZ did she finally confess. Her behavior only got worse from there. She refused to apologize when uncle and cousin came by to get the Game Boy, and had the balls to act like SHE was the one being wronged. I feel like I need to drop the hammer on her and send the message home that stealing is not okay. I think that purchasing the Switch, with my daughter's help from money she would earn by doing extra chores, and having her give it to cousin might be a good way to deliver that message while simultaneously giving cousin a nice upgrade to make amends. I mentioned this to a friend and they said this would be a move because birthday. I don't really think that matters, but the comment was enough to make me question myself. I do intend on giving my kiddo the opportunity to earn a Switch down the line, just not in such close proximity to this incident. Not sure how or when, since I have a SO to consult, but the opportunity will be provided in some way. Our therapist is of the opinion that my daughter largely has these issues because of the inconsistent co-parenting relationship her bio dad has with my husband and I. My husband and I are big on structure, boundaries, natural consequences, and following through. Her bio dad is the exact opposite of us. He and his family hardly ever tell her no to the things she wants, and give her a ridiculous amount of treats, toys, candy, etc., and this is causing her to be confused, to struggle with our expectations, and express herself negatively. I assure you, we have been addressing these behaviors for quite some time. I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times, and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions, through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem. And though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me. He had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night, because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life, or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl," were still on his profile, but the words, girlfriend, or love of my life, were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask, which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. Two things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said, I defiantly was. But my love, and attention and affection, became a pillar he could rely on, and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single, and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple, and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with, but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander, When it comes to, this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end, I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated.